Okay, quick video here. If you're getting a media out error on the ZT 410, 420, ZT 200 series, like any of the ZT printers that have this sort of a construction, there's a few things I want to go over here with you. Basically, what this situation will cause is basically you won't be able to operate because you've got a media out error here, right? And the printer's just going to remain paused, and it's flagging that your supplies, that there's an issue. It thinks the labels aren't in the machine. Of course, you know they are in the machine. What can happen easily with these printers, and there's some tricks to kind of getting it solved that I'll go over here, but basically this printer thinks that there's no labels loaded in it right now, but you know there are, right? But there's a few guiding spots that keep these supplies running through the machine in a straight line and keep them on track. And if these guides, like in particular this one, are not slid over properly all the way, you can get the supplies will drift out on you a little bit and will move a little bit to the right, okay, away from, I call this the firewall of the machine, right? That's what Zebra calls it. You'll get movement of the supplies away from the main body of the machine, okay? And in my opinion, probably the design of this guide does allow this to happen, but what can easily happen is this guide can get bumped when you're reloading the supplies and it can get moved. So this needs to be adjusted so that it's up against the supplies, and this also needs to be forced all the way over so that when you put a new roll of label material on here, that you're getting proper, left to right guidance of the material through the print engine of the machine. Okay, so, and this guide here in particular, you might even think it's in the right position, but it may not be. See, if you open the print head and you move the supplies here, now you'll see that now that guide is out away a quarter of an inch or so more than it should be, and so you'll need to just ease that in just enough. You don't want to be bending the supplies like that. Now you see I've got it so it's crinkling the edge of the supplies. You want to just beyond the reach of the width of the supplies like that, okay? And the reason you can get label out errors, there's a couple of label sensors in the machine. One of them is like a fork type sensor that the material goes through right in that area, okay? And if the labels move out too far away from that, away from the firewall, you can see there's a red light there, it may not pick up the supplies. And then there's also another sensor that's sometimes used by the machine, but you can see that red light down there, and you can see if I were to move the supplies out just slightly, okay, you could see that. I'm going to move this ribbon out of your way so you can see that. There's the edge of the label material. If you were to allow those guides to not be moving the material properly, you could see where the edge of that label material, it has to sense when the gaps are going by the sensor. Okay, I'll try and stop it when the gap is at that red light for you right there. So you can see it's right on the edge of seeing that rounded part. It's kind of hard to see from the video here, but basically that sensor, now, there's the transmissive sensor and the reflective sensor, and, these machines will, decide internally which sensor to use, but what I do is I also will slide that sensor in to make sure it's not in danger of being too close to the hairy edge there of that label material. Let's get that sensor in a little bit. Okay, and then when you open the print head, make sure that the material is running up against the firewall properly. Okay, so, and what ends up restricting it is that fork sensor in the back. That ends up being what's going to decide how far in this label material can track against the firewall, right? So you want to get that in position. As I showed you earlier, we want to get this guide slid in, but you don't want it constricting the material too much. And you want to get this guide so that it's up against the roll of the material, Okay, so that what happens is when people will load a new roll of material into the machine, they'll sometimes, this will get moved out a little bit, just, and with everyday usage, and they're slapping a roll on there quickly, and that gets moved out. And then sometimes when you're reloading the machine and stuffing the material through, this sensor can get moved out. Okay, and then lastly, one of the trade secrets that I know about for preventing this problem is taking these pressure feet right here. Okay, and what I do to help keep the supplies against the firewall and stop them from wandering out away from the firewall is, what I'll do is I'll just cheat a little bit of extra pressure. Like if you keep that one, let's say, on 2, I might put this one on like 2.5 on this side. And what that does is that gives this part of the platen roller, the platen roller is this white roller underneath. It's going to give that a little bit more traction on that side. So as it's pulling the label material, it's going to encourage it to stay in that direction. The other thing I've seen is this reflective sensor here, the one I'm moving right there. I've seen where brand new printers right out of the factory, that sensor is like moved all the way over. Okay, and it can either happen in shipping, because this side is the side that's down when it's in the shipping container, or from the factory, it just gets kind of shipped that way. But I would move that out a 1/2 inch if you're using die cut label stock, just to ensure that the wandering of this material, can't cause a label out error on you, and you'll get calibrating problems, skipping of labels, you'll just get media out errors, like what I've caused here on this printer. I've got it kind of paused right now, but so these are sort of the major areas that will decide how your label material is going to move from left to right in the machine. You want to keep it against the firewall. Make sure your guides are all the way, once the material is properly against the firewall, again, using that fork that's way in the back, that's what's ultimately going to be the guider of the material, as far as how far in it can go against the firewall. Get your guides over, against the edge of the material, front and back, and then if you need to go even beyond that, you can kind of put a little bit of extra pressure on this left-hand foot here. Again, any of these printers that have this type of design where they can be side-loaded, the XI printers, which I think are the workhorse printers, they don't have this. You have to push the material through the side. So there's no danger of this thing getting, I've seen situations where even if this is in the correct place, the material can ride up under the sensor like that. Okay, and if you see that happening, that can also cause label out errors and calibration errors and skipping of labels. These are all things I'm going to put down as the symptoms that are cured by this proper procedure, okay, because I think this is extremely common out there in the field. So again, this is any of the side loading machines that have this kind of guide. It's doing it from the top. The more traditional Zebras, this guide was from the bottom, and it's a much higher guide. It's about 3/4 of an inch high, and it's almost impossible for the label material to go over the guide. But what happens in those cases is there's a little thumb screw underneath that comes loose, and the guide might move or even be missing. We get a lot of printers in where this guide on the XI printers is completely gone and just vibrated loose, and it just fell off. So anyway, hope that helps with label out errors. Again, I think this is probably one of the most common things that people are searching on, and this is for the ZT series printers, 200, 210, ZT, all the 200 series, and then the ZT 400 series, where they're side loading and they have this small yellow guide on the side. Thanks.